Think about this for a second. Imagine the most influential language in all of human prehistory. A language that's the great-great-great-grandparent to hundreds of others spoken today, all the way from Ireland to India. Now imagine not a single word of it was ever written down. Today, we're on a linguistic detective mission. We're chasing a ghost, a language that's the ancestor to nearly half the words spoken on Earth. So let's start the hunt.
Okay, so what do English and Bengali have in common? I mean, on the surface, you'd say pretty much nothing, right? One spoken in London, the other in Kolkata, thousands and thousands of miles apart. They sound totally different, but they share a secret, a really deep, ancient connection that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And that connection, it's not small. It is huge. 44%. Just let that sink in. Today, almost half the people on this planet speak a language that belongs to this one single family. We're talking English, Spanish, Russian, Persian, Hindi, Bengali. The list goes on and on. They're all part of the same linguistic dynasty. And that brings us to the central mystery, the real puzzle of it all. We have this enormous, sprawling family tree of languages, but its root, the parent language we now call Proto-Indo-European, or PIE for short, is a complete phantom. It was spoken and it vanished, thousands of years before anyone was writing things down, leaving us with this incredible historical whodunit to solve. So, how on earth do you even begin to prove a language existed if there's no physical evidence, no books, no carvings, nothing? Well, this is a detective story. And it all starts with a couple of brilliant people noticing a pattern so strong it just couldn't be a coincidence. And this quote? This is basically the eureka moment. You've got this British judge in India in 1786, Sir William Jones. He's studying ancient Sanskrit, and he realizes, wait a minute, the grammar, the core words, this looks an awful lot like classical Greek and Latin. So similar, in fact, that it couldn't possibly be an accident. He proposed they must have all sprung from some common source, a source that was probably long gone. And with that, the hunt was on. Okay, so Jones has this incredible idea, but an idea is one thing. You need proof, right? Cold, hard evidence. Linguists needed more than just some vague similarities. They needed to prove a genetic relationship. They had to find the linguistic equivalent of DNA, something that was passed down through the generations and could trace a clear line of descent. And they found it. That evidence, that linguistic DNA, turned out to be something called cognates. Now, this is a super important concept. These aren't just words that sound a little bit alike because one language borrowed from another. No. These are words that are inherited from the exact same parent word. Think of them like family heirlooms, passed down for thousands of years, getting a little worn and changed along the way, but you can still tell they came from the same place. Just check this out. This is Exhibit A. Look at these incredibly basic core words, father, mother, 3. The resemblance, across thousands of miles and thousands of years, it's just undeniable. And look closer. See how the P sound in the Latin pater matches up with the F sound in the English father? That's not random. That is a systematic, predictable change. It's a pattern of inheritance. This right here, this is the smoking gun. So once they had this smoking gun, the whole field just exploded. Linguists started developing this incredible forensic toolkit. And I want to be really clear here. This isn't just wild guessing. This is a rigorous scientific process for literally reverse engineering a language, for bringing this ghost tongue back to life sound by sound. And the entire science of this rests on one single powerful idea. Sound change isn't random. It's regular. It follows rules. Think of it like this. If a P sound changes to an F sound in one word in a language's history, it's probably going to do it in all the other similar words too. That predictability is what makes this whole thing possible. It turns language history from a mystery into a code that can be cracked. And this process has a name. It's called the comparative method. And it's pretty logical when you break it down. Step 1, you gather your evidence. Big, long lists of all those cognates. Step 2, you figure out the rules of the game, the system of how sounds changed between all the related languages. And finally, step 3, you work backwards. You reverse the sound changes to reconstruct what the original ancestral word, the protoform, must have been. And by the way, whenever you see a word with a little star or asterisk next to it, that's just a signal to us that it's a reconstruction, our best scientific hypothesis of what the word sounded like.
Now, the most famous of these rule sets is, without a doubt, Grimm's Law. And yeah, it's that Grimm, one of the brothers Grimm, was also a brilliant linguist. This law describes a chain reaction of sound shifts that makes the Germanic languages, like English, different from others. For instance, that P becoming an F we talked about, that's part of it. The original PIE word for foot started with a P. It stays a P in Latin, pes, but in the Germanic branch, it predictably shifts to an F, giving us foot. It's like a linguistic fingerprint that identifies our specific branch of the family tree.
But of course, it's never that simple, is it? The method worked brilliantly most of the time, but there were always these weird exceptions, these anomalies. Vowel patterns that just didn't seem to follow the rules. Something was missing from the picture.
And this is where the story goes from cool to absolutely mind-blowing. In 1879, a brilliant young linguist named Ferdinand de Saussure comes along and proposes something that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction. He says, what if the reason for all these exceptions is that there were ghost consonants in the original language? Sounds that vanished completely over time, but not before leaving behind these little ghostly footprints that changed the vowels around them.
Now, for 50 years, this idea, called the laryngeal theory, was just that, a theory. A beautiful, elegant theory with absolutely zero direct proof. It was pure abstraction. It was like an astronomer seeing a tiny wobble in a star's orbit and saying, I bet there's an invisible planet there causing that, even though no one had ever seen it. And then they found the planet. In the 1920s, scholars finally deciphered Hittite, an ancient language from Turkey. And unbelievably, this still gives me chills, the Hittite language had a real actual consonant, a kind of throaty huh sound, in the exact spot where Saussure's theory predicted a ghost consonant should be 50 years earlier. It was this stunning confirmation. It proved that historical linguistics wasn't just descriptive, it was a predictive science. So, with these incredibly powerful tools, linguists could now reconstruct not just sounds, but whole words. And once you have words, you have so much more than a dictionary. You have a window that lets you paint a portrait of the people who spoke this language and the world they inhabited.
And what did those words tell us? Well, for one thing, they were pioneers of technology. We can reconstruct a whole wagon package of words. They had the whole shebang, a word for horse, wheel, axle, yoke, and even a specific verb that meant to transport something in a vehicle. This is a massive clue. It tells us they were a mobile people, and it helps us place them in a specific time and place, after the invention of the wheel. But their vocabulary tells us even more. We know they were pastoralists. They had words for cow and sheep. We know their society was hierarchical, and that family lines were traced through the father. We even know who they worshipped. Their chief god was a sky father, a name reconstructed as Deus Flater. Now, does that sound at all familiar? It should. Deus Flater is the direct ancestor of the Greek Zeus Pater and the Roman Jupiter. It's right there in the name. So all this evidence, the wagons, the animals, their social structure, it all leads to the final, biggest question in our whole detective story: where did they live? Where on the vast Eurasian continent was the homeland, the Heimat, where this all began?
For decades, the academic world was basically split between two big competing theories. On one side, you had the steppe hypothesis, which said they were horse-riding pastoralists from the vast grasslands of what's now Ukraine and Russia around 4000 BCE. On the other side was the Anatolian hypothesis, which argued they were much earlier farmers from modern-day Turkey who spread out slowly with agriculture. So who was right? Well, the tiebreaker, the final, decisive clue, didn't come from linguistics at all. It came from genetics. In just the last decade or so, studies of ancient DNA have provided the answer. They've revealed a massive migration of people out of the Ponte-Caspian steppe, starting around 3000 BCE. The genes perfectly match the linguistic map. Case closed. So this is basically how it all went down. You start with a unified language on the steppe around 4500 BCE. Then, over thousands of years, groups begin to peel off. The ancestors of the Hittites leave first, then the early Germanic speakers form their own dialects, other waves migrate west into Europe, and others head south towards Iran and India, each group's language changing and evolving until you have the hundreds of distinct languages we know today. So, the mystery of the ghost tongue is largely solved, and it leaves us with this truly remarkable thought.
every single time you talk about your father or your mother, every time you count to 3, you are unknowingly speaking a few words of Proto-Indo-European. You are preserving a faint 6,000-year-old echo from a world that has long, long since vanished. Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other ancient echoes are hiding in the words you speak every day?